Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, Ad Nauseam listeners, to episode 170 of the podcast. As always, my name is Dr. David C. Noe. The C stands for capacious.
All right.
I'm taking it in and keeping it down. I don't know. And I'm here in the vomitorium. This is Vomitorium Central now, I guess, with my good friend and fabulous co-host, Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. Yeah, despite the frigid cold outside. It's gotten a little bit better, but man, if any of our Michiganders are listening,
oh my,
it plunged into the negatives.
It was really cold this week, wasn't it?
It was, right.
So I hear.
Yes, you escaped a little bit. You were down south.
Yes. I went down to Florida, and I got to give a little bit of a talk there at one of their institutions of higher education.
Nice.
On the character of Samuel Rutherford, and got back here into the cold north. And I went to the YMCA last night.
You did? Okay.
Which strikes me as a particularly Greek or Roman thing to do.
Kind of going to the baths?
The public baths.
Yeah.
That's right. And as I eased myself into the warm hot tub,
yes,
there was a woman in there who was reading a book.
In the hot tub?
In the hot tub. This is true, Jeff.
Okay.
This is not
This is not a bit?
This is not the setup for the bit. That's coming later.
Okay, all right.
This is just what I call, I don't know, notes on the passing scene.
Yeah, okay.
And I thought, wow, that is incredible. I want to write the kind of book that someone feels compelled to read in a hot tub.
In a hot tub, yeah.
She couldn't put it down. She was risking so much there.
Yes.
And I don't know what it was, but
did you what was the title?
I tried to spy the title,
Yeah.
and I wasn't successful. Maybe it's because of the fumes and wasn't wearing glasses.
You didn't try to spark up a casual conversation.
No. It's a very awkward time.
A hot tub is a very
right to talk to a stranger in the hot tub about what they're reading. It was a work of fiction, I'll say that.
Okay, all right.
But that's commitment.
Man, that
Have
is
you ever
something.
taken a book into a hot tub?
I've never seen anybody.
Yeah, this is the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it must have been something quite compelling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As a bit of a segue, without any clear connection.
Yes.
When I was a young man, my family liked to engage quite a bit in gardening. Mm-hmm. And so one summer we picked out a spot in order to plant, some legumes and some items from the family nightshade and so forth.
Yes.
We picked out this spot. It was a little bit sandy. And so we planted some tomatoes, we planted some beans, some parsnips, some potatoes, and maybe some peas. But guess what happened?
What happened?
It turns out that this was not the ideal spot for a garden because the place was infested with those loppy-eared rodents with the fuzzy tails.
No, the rabbits. Yes.
The rabbits.
Yeah,
that's right. And they were just there was not just one or two, but it was like a whole colony of them, or whatever you call that.
And they were devouring everything you were planting.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
And I think maybe the listener knows what you call a group of rabbits living together.
Yeah.
And so they were just destroying the vegetables. So I came up with this idea. Why don't we put like a fence around it?
Yes.
And then anybody who wants to visit the garden would have to pay a small fee. We put like a booth there to collect the fee.
Yes.
And then if they want to visit the garden, they pay that little toll at the booth, and then they can go in and they can see the devastation that the rabbits have wrought on the vegetable garden.
Okay. So the devastation is almost like a local tourist attraction.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Turn it into a draw.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right.
And it worked. And my plan was that the many visitors, they would pay this fee, and then we would use the we would use the proceeds to buy something to distract the rabbits.
Gotcha. Okay.
Little toys and the kinds of things that the rabbits
all right
might. You see where this is going?
No, I do not. Okay. But I can't wait.
That might enjoy playing with in order to prevent them from ruining the vegetables, the beans and the tomatoes and the corn and the peas.
Yes.
And eventually it worked.
Okay. Yeah.
Eventually it worked. You could say that the toys that we bought with the proceeds from the toll booth, you could call them the tolls toy, eventually led to Warren Peas.
Oh man. That a tip of the cap to you. Not bad. Not bad. Especially
pretty bad.
Well, I think we had said a few episodes back that we were
scraping the bottom of the barrel.
We were done with these things. But you come
the
back.
warren, right? A group of rabbits isn't it a warren?
A warren, yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So careful attention to the Toll's toy.
Yes.
Eventually leads to warren peas.
Nice.
Okay.
Wonderful. Yes.
Moving right along.
I love all. Did this come from you? Were you kind of pondering those wonderful names for groups of different animals? I've always loved that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if the listener pays attention, at the very end of the program, we're going to drop another one of these.
Oh, we are.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's not the murder of crows.
Yes.
Which is one that fascinates me.
Murder of crows. A parliament of owls.
I didn't know that.
Crash of rhino.
No, really?
Yes. I love that little.
We should do an entire episode on that sometime.
We should. Yeah.
What do you call a group of podcasters all huddled and congregated together?
Regrettable?
Yeah. A regrettable of podcasters?
Right.
Could be. So, Jeff, what are we talking about today?
We are back to our old friend Marrou.
Oh, yeah.
And his walk through education in the ancient world.
This would be Henri Iranet.
Yep. And so I'm forgetting. Remind me, Dave. What's the date of this publication of this?
It's late 1950s.
Okay,
It's he's a Frenchman. It's post World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So occasionally we'll get these really interesting and biting comments about fascism and Nazism.
Yes.
Here I'm looking at it's 1956.
Okay.
First published in 1956. It was translated out of the French so that folks by a man named George Lamb, so that folks like us could understand it. Marrou was a professor at the Sorbonne. Which is in Paris.
That's right.
If I'm not mistaken. And here we are in part 2 of the book, and we are in chapter 7. Now, Jeff, can you tell the listeners honestly how you felt when we launched into the preparation for this episode?
I wasn't all that happy. I think that I think I leveled some complaints about Marrou the last time we but it's more I think I have a beef with the translator.
Really?
Yeah, I find just the kind of a tough slog sometimes. And I guess I find Mr. Marrou a little bit repetitive. So first 3 pages in today for what we're talking about.
Right.
I was like, oh, here we go again.
You were snoozing.
But
yes.
It quickly got a lot better and a lot more interesting.
Well, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I also like the many snarky asides that Marrou drops about contemporary education, that is, of his own time.
Yeah.
Which now is approaching 70 years ago, but in some sense seems very current to me.
It does. Most of those snarky asides I read, and I think, that rings true.
Exactly.
And then there's also some places where it seems like his experience of contemporary education back in the 50s seems strikingly the opposite of where we are today. But
did you come across, just as a little teaser, the ancient version of the PowerPoint?
I didn't. What?
Okay, well, we'll have to look at that when we get into it. Now, we have no shout out today.
No.
But it's probably time to drop the secret code word, don't you think?
For our giveaway.
Exactly.
Yep. So we have a ratio 4, this wonderful new machine, which we'll say more about in the ads later.
Of course.
To give away. And listeners, if you write into Dave at adnauseam.com, don't forget that V, and you type in the Latin word for 4, quatuor, and spell it correctly.
That's right.
We will enter your name in a drawing. And we're going to announce the winner in March.
In March, yes. Okay. We're going to give it some time to build a head of steam, a nice frothy head of steam, you might say. And got some great entries. I love the ones where they say non quinque, sed quatuor.
Oh, it's showing off a little bit.
Not 5, but 4. And several persons had the same hilarious idea of having quatuor on one line and below it an interlinear translation for us of the word 4.
Wow, man.
The first one I got, I thought, that's really clever. That's funny. I thought that with the second one too, but it just proves to me that, great minds, those who are listening to the podcast, they think alike.
Exactly.
So that code word?
Yeah, that code word is quatuor.
Quattuor.
Yep.
And send that in and you'll be entered.
To get one of these wonderful machines. Yes. Don't hesitate. Do it.
All right, Jeff. Let's get going here on Marrou, Part 2, Chapter 7. This is pages 160 and following of the text. Get us started, will you please?
Right. So this is a chapter entitled Literary Studies at Secondary School Standard. And so Marrou, he begins by talking about the various levels of education primary school, secondary school, and studies beyond that.
Right.
And he talks about in these opening paragraphs. I mean, one of the things I was frustrated with. I think this has a lot to do with the translator. Is I'm not exactly sure what he was trying to say. My sense is, and correct me if I'm wrong. He says that one of the problems is that as kind of a culture expands, as a culture has a continuity to it, he suggests that education gets the syllabus gets heavy.
Yeah, top heavy in particular.
Right. But he seemed to be saying that a lot of what was studied at a particular level gets offloaded onto the previous level.
Okay.
And kind of shoved down the line to make room for things later on. Right.
Well, this kind of rang true to my experience, and I was surprised that it didn't for yours. Maybe it will after we look at it together.
Yeah.
At the second paragraph, he says, there is also a general law to be kept in mind. Educational syllabuses tend to become increasingly top-heavy as the years go by, with the result that subjects gradually sink. They begin by being advanced, and they end by being ordinary or even elementary. So the reason I thought this rang true to my experience was my time in higher education. There's an endless redefining of terminology by those who are not actually involved in the teaching of the classes. Do you remember having to fill out those SWOT charts?
Oh, yeah.
SWOT.
What do those stand for?
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Yes.
And when it came to pedagogy and our programs, we were required by, I'm going to say it, people with education degrees. We just lost a lot of listeners to fill out these SWOT forms, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And the only one I was really comfortable with was the last one.
The threats.
Exactly. If you make me fill out one more of these,
right.
But it was always the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right? Strength. Some students are interested. Most faculty are knowledgeable. Weaknesses, gross ignorance all around. Opportunities, right, to learn. And threats, the funding's going to be cut.
Yeah.
Right. But it was kind of this. I don't know if you remember. Maybe you still have this kind of pressure. The endless refinement of a syllabus to have learning outcomes, distinctives. So much stuff gets larded into a syllabus. There's often not time to really deal with the content of the course.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. No, I totally get that. And that the way you describe it, that rings true to me as well. I guess the way I read this was. Is that things that were taught at a secondary level now become so standard that it kind of makes its way down into an earlier curriculum.
Well, I think that's happened too. And so he's saying this happened in Antiquity. It happens today. But I think that the difference is, well, maybe it's not a difference. Today when that happens, what you find is that persons in the lower levels are doing those kinds of things, but just not doing them well.
I see.
The sense of, if you're a senior in high school, you read Shakespeare and you talk about it.
Yeah.
If Shakespeare is now read in 8th grade, what kind of level, no offense 8th graders, what kind of level of literary criticism can 8th graders engage in?
Yeah.
So the tasks and the goals tend to descend.
Gotcha.
But they can't possibly keep pace with the abilities of the younger students.
Right.
That's what I thought he was describing.
Gotcha. I like that. I mean, I was thinking like, well, if I were to compare a kind of a standard high school curriculum to what was happening 100 years ago, it would seem to be the opposite.
Yes.
Things are being kind of watered down and dumbed down.
Yes, I think there's truth to that as well.
And I think about, so much more, my students today than 15, 20 years ago, coming in with the writing ability and the ability to put an argument together has dropped.
Much less general knowledge.
Right. So, but I think from what you described, I think that the notion is more complex than I was taking.
Yes, yeah. and later he will Marrou will talk about the effort to get younger children to do more advanced things and how that can slow down their full mental development.
Yeah.
So I think he ties it in better later on.
Gotcha.
So I agree with your assessment that initially it's a little opaque.
Right. But then he shifts into, I thought this stuff was very, very interesting when he starts to get into, okay, what exactly were students of the various levels, what were they reading?
Yes.
And then the question of why they were reading it.
Right.
And I thought, just to kind of foreshadow this, when he comes around talking about how this becomes so standardized that nobody seems to be asking the question in the late empire of like, why are we doing this?
Right.
And it's almost well, we do this because we've always done it.
We've always done it.
Yeah.
There's something in here about the metaphor that they did not think at that time that they were living in the autumn of their development. Someone criticized them here it is on page 161. As something essentially classical, I'll just read this quote.
Yeah.
Hellenistic civilization was the opposite of those revolutionary, innovating cultures that are propelled forward by a great creative drive. It rested essentially upon the peaceful possession of an already acquired capital. It is a mistake to say, as is often said by its detractors, that classical education was born with its head back to front, looking back to the past. It is not autumnal, tormented with nostalgic regrets for a vanished spring. On the contrary, it looks upon itself as firmly established in an unchanging present, in the full blaze of a hot summer sun. It knows what mighty reserves it possesses, what past masters it has. So that was striking to me.
Yeah, but it also strikes me a bit at odds of when I think about Hellenistic culture,
right?
And if you think about the art, the sculpture that's coming out of this, a lot of kind of the scientific progress, and even experimenting with hydraulics and like early steam powered engines coming out of Alexandria, and how that seems to be at odds with what he's describing. That education seems to be very static, right? It's
technological advancement, but education as a whole
is always like
static.
It's Homer, and
right.
and a lot of it just simply staying there.
Yeah, and the most technology you can get from Homer, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense because it was very important, was things like how to break horses, how to hitch your wagon properly, how to tie on your shield, how to make food of various kinds throughout the Odyssey.
How to drag a body.
Exactly. You're going to need that sometimes.
Yeah.
So where are you going to go? There's no YouTube.
Right.
So you go to HomerTube to find out those things.
Yeah, exactly.
So we get in this section, which is the second section of the chapter, what a classic is. And I think we actually get a bit of a definition.
Yes. So at the very end of the paragraph that you were just reading, so Marrou starts out by saying, well, I should define terms. What do I mean by classics?
Right.
What did it mean back then? And he writes, a classical culture can be defined as a unified collection of great masterpieces existing as the recognized basis of its scale of values.
Yeah.
I like that.
I do too. And what I like about it is that it is a generalizing statement.
Yeah.
So when he says a classical culture, the one we're dealing with is the Greeks and the Romans. Mm-hmm. But any kind of tendency toward conservation of culture, which you could call conservatism, is going to exist in different places. Now, here I know almost nothing about Confucianism.
Yes.
But my impression is that Confucianism was a classical culture.
Yes.
In the sense that it was a comprehensive way to understand the world, the divine, and people's place in it. And
indeed.
That all had to be carefully preserved over actually millennia.
Right.
So Marrou's definition would fit Confucianism as well as the Greco-Roman classics.
Yes. Now, I'm remembering something that you said, and correct me if I get this wrong, is that we in our kind of our conversation about the value of classical education today, and you've said things along the lines that you don't subscribe to the fact that reading Homer will make you a better person.
Not a morally better person.
Not a morally better person.
That's right.
And it seems to me that...
I also don't subscribe to the idea that it will make you a morally worse person.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. It seemed to me that Marrou was making the argument that in Hellenistic culture, there does seem to be an idea that why do you read Homer? Because it will make you more moral.
Yes. Now, we're anticipating a little bit, but I think that when he does describe that, he's describing the Stoics in particular.
Yes.
And he's making fun of them because I don't think Marrou accepts that premise.
Okay.
Now, if you said, will reading Homer make you a better Greek? Oh, absolutely. In fact, you can't be a Greek without reading Homer.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can't think like a Greek. And there's something good in learning to think like a Greek.
Yeah.
But one of the bedrock principles of being a Greek is help your friends, harm your enemies.
Right.
That is what Achilles describes in Book 9 of the Iliad as, his purpose in life.
Right.
That's what Phoenix taught him, right?
Yes.
Is to harm his enemies but help his friends.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's not going to make you a better person in the truest sense of better, that as I define it.
Right. Yeah. It's that at the end of that quote there, he said the recognized basis of its scale of values.
Scale of values.
It's implied that so what survives, what gets canonized is stuff that we recognize that reflects shared
absolutely
values. Right.
And that is a brilliant and really important point. Is that values have a scale, right? Not everything in life is equally important.
Yeah.
This is a hard thing, I think, for people to learn. It's a hard thing for me to learn, right?
Yeah.
You value different people, different experiences, different objects based on a really complicated set of assumptions and commitments.
Yeah.
And, the Greeks, their valuations are quite different than Christians, but also quite different than moderns.
Yeah.
Generally.
Yeah. My sense is that I think there's of course, in the last 50 plus years, there's been a lot of pushback against even the notion of a canon, right? And my sense is that culture, Western culture, has become so fragmented and individualized that even kind of the notion of revering something because it reflects a shared values is almost anathema to so many people, right? Yeah.
Why should I adopt the values of someone else? I don't want to share someone else's values. Now, for me, I don't want to share, a good T-bone or porterhouse.
I'm with you.
It's all mine.
Right.
But if you and I both, value good meals and good conversation, then that's it's a shared value on the scale, right?
Right.
And deciding what the scale is, maybe this is some of the value of looking at something like, not to get too far from Marrou, of looking at something like the scale of values in Greek and Latin culture. Mm-hmm. We can then see, well, this isn't exactly like mine, although it may overlap in many, many ways.
Right.
Finding those spots of discontinuity,
yes,
you might say.
Yep.
Can you carry on there at the bottom of 161? Because, please, I think the next part really helps set the stage.
Right. So Marrou writes, the Hellenistic age carried its official canonization of the classics to great lengths. The educational tradition had produced lists of typical great men, legislators, painters, sculptors, and inventors. These lists eventually came to be codified, probably by people connected with the university in Pergamum, perhaps in the middle of the 2nd century BC, and thus the canon was established. 10 Attic orators, 10 historians, 10 painters, 10 sculptors, poets, philosophers, physicians.
Yes.
So this was new to me.
Yeah.
That even the question, like, where does the canon come from?
Right.
I realized it was a question that I had not really thought about. But,
right.
Marrou suggesting that out of this Hellenistic culture kind of comes these official lists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, why 10? I think it's because the number of fingers.
Oh, you think so?
I do.
Yeah.
There has to be some number. And later he'll talk about the 7 wise men of Greece, symbolic numbers, the 7 wonders of the world, the 7 liberal arts.
Right.
So there's nothing magical about 10 or about 7.
Yeah.
But 10 is the number of fingers that you have. So it's an easy mnemonic device.
Right.
And you might say, well, why not 9? Well, that's not enough.
Right.
Why 11?
Right.
That's too many.
It's too many.
We need 10.
I think, like, well, why not? If you were thinking in terms of like a Greek tradition, 12 would seem to be.
Yeah, that'd be good.
And
weren't there 10 demes also?
There were 10 demes.
Right.
Yeah.
A deme being like a subgroup or a county within the Attic population.
Exactly. But I mean, numbers like 3 and 7 too. They will often have kind
good
of
numbers,
sacred significance in
Absolutely.
lots of cultures around the world.
Right. Like the four winds. Right.
Right.
4 different directions. The directions of the compass.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was a ranking within them, and of course, whatever. If you're right-handed, the thumb on your right hand is Homer.
Oh.
If we're going to talk about poets, right?
Okay. Yeah.
It gets it all started.
Right.
But I don't know which finger was the most important to the Greeks. It could be the index, could be the middle finger.
Right.
So I'm sure that within the 10 there was a ranking.
Yeah.
And maybe some kids had trouble remembering the last one.
Yeah.
But I had heard of the 10 orators.
Okay.
I wasn't aware of the 10 painters, the 10 sculptors. So there you had a very clearly defined scale of values. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine someone starting a campaign to substitute, like, the ring finger on the left hand. Let's get rid of Aristophanes there and put in someone like Menander.
Right.
No dice.
Yeah. Right. Right.
This is it.
Yeah. You had to think like the last 3 fingers. There's going to be a bit of a revolving door, a kind of a shuffling in and
You're
out. Right.
Yeah.
Homer's always going to be there.
That's right.
Yeah. But
Plato, Demosthenes, they're going to be in the top. But as you get further down the scale, it might be a little more difficult to remember.
Yeah. I thought I wanted more from Marrou in this chapter is answering the question of, okay, why? I mean, I think with Homer, it becomes very, very clear. But he talks later on about how amongst the dramatists, Euripides comes to dominate, and Aeschylus and Sophocles are secondary, which seems to be kind of a flip flop from the 5th century.
Yeah.
And I thought I would have liked a little bit more of, okay, what's going on that that shift happens.
Well,
but we can talk about
let's
it.
go through the chapter and,
Right.
and see whether the listeners share some of our criticisms, or maybe they want to take the thought in another direction.
Yeah.
So we have Homer. That's the second section. In the forefront, of course, says Marrou, and dominating all the rest stands Homer. Throughout the Hellenistic period, his popularity never wavered. There is abundant proof of this. Alexander the Great taking his carefully guarded, piously regarded Iliad with him on all his campaigns, the towns lost in the remotest corners of the Greek world. Marseille, Sinope, the cities of Cyprus, which had their own special editions of the Iliad, made in proof of their loyalty to the Greek heritage when they were faced with or surrounded by barbarians.
Yeah.
So this is like the desert island question, right? Mm-hmm. You can take one book to the desert island. What are you taking, Jeff?
Oh my gosh.
You can leave out the Bible.
Okay.
Okay. Because as the sacred book of authority for us, we'll leave it out of consideration.
Okay. Yeah.
What would it be for you?
The one that just immediately jumps to mind is the Aeneid.
Aeneid.
The Aeneid. Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, there you're wrong. It's supposed to be the Iliad. Maybe the Odyssey.
They'd be in my top 5.
Okay.
But yeah.
That's your scale of values there, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's showing.
And it's interesting that he mentions Alexander the Great's famous connection and
Right.
and love for the Iliad. I'm reading a book right now about the discovery of the royal tombs at Vergina.
Yeah.
It's fantastic, and of all the the complexities and differing interpretations of the bones there. But the author has the better part of a chapter talking about how there's so much evidence that the Macedonians were desperate to be seen as Greek. Right, so you had Philip II
Right.
competing at Olympia,
Right.
And they chafed against this idea that the Athenians kind of sneered at these
Oh, yeah.
barbarians, these pretenders.
Oh yeah.
And I have
as Demosthenes said, right? They were polygamous, fur-wearing,
milk drinking.
Exactly.
Right, exactly, yeah.
monsters.
Right. So I think that now I don't doubt that Alexander had a deep love for the Iliad, but
Right.
the part of the propaganda had to be like,
Yeah.
look, this great man he's linked to Homer just like you guys are. And
Exactly.
So a knowledge of and a deep appreciation for Homer is inextricably linked with being Greek.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then he says, Marrou, the gigantic figure of Homer loomed on the horizon from primary school days. Quote, Homer was not a man, but a god, end quote, was one of the first sentences that children copied down in their handwriting lessons.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of this has to do with, I think he goes on to say, well, why Homer? Well, I think a lot of it has to do, Homer's first.
Yeah.
Right? He's at the very beginning.
And I would say that the most amazing thing about Homer is not just that he's at the beginning, but that it's such a finished work of art.
Right.
It's incredible.
Right. And the way in which Homer, comes to be mined for everything. It's not just the story, it's not just the music, the poetry,
Right.
but it's theology, it's science, it's philosophy.
It's the Bible of the Greeks, as has been said.
Yep.
So what did you think at the bottom of 162, top of 163 about the mom who's taking a lot of pride in the fact that her boy is making it through the Iliad?
Would you read this?
Oh, I'd like to hear it from you, man.
Okay. Let me see where I can pick it up here. So, thus it was bound to be considered a great privilege to start on a comprehensive reading of the poet's entire work, talking about studying this as a kid.
That's right.
A mother who asked the teacher how her son was getting on felt a thrill of pride when she was told he is studying the sixth, or the Zeta, the Canto Zeta of the Iliad.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Right. So mom's saying, "Oh, what? He's already up to Canto Zeta."
My boy's on the 6th book of the Iliad, right?
Bragging rights in the neighborhood.
Yes. Yeah. That's the Diomedea, maybe, isn't it? The exploits of Diomedes?
I believe. Yeah.
I think so. We're going to go with that, and we'll get some Corricula from the careful listeners at some point.
Yeah, I was trying to. Is there any kind of corollary of that today? Like, what gives parents bragging rights? Maybe scores on the SAT.
Yeah, I would say that's it.
Something like that.
Taking calculus as a 9th grader.
Yeah.
I would say. I don't know. I can't really think of anything. Most bragging rights are confined to sports.
That's true.
I don't think that sports seems like the area that you can brag with impunity.
Yeah.
But if you start to brag about your child's intellectual accomplishments, other people.
Yeah, you've crossed a line.
You're saying that you're better than they are.
It's true.
I don't know why that is.
I think that's exactly right. Isn't that funny?
It is funny.
It's weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit more about Homer, though.
Yeah, we got to get to the Egyptian papyri because this is fascinating.
Right. So Marrou talks about how fragments of papyri dug out of the sands of Egypt, where a lot of his information is coming from, is Hellenistic Egypt, shows that Homer was embedded as a schoolboy exercise. Copying letters, copying lines,
right,
and surely memorizing them and reciting them.
Yeah, and just a few pages later, he'll tell us a little bit about how Homer was studied, explanation of the text, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
But which book, Iliad or Odyssey, did the ancients consider better educationally?
Well, I think in the Grand Calculus, he says that the Iliad it punches much harder. He does drop this line where he says that philosophers seem to have preferred the Odyssey.
Yes, the philosophers considered the Odyssey the more important of the two books.
Yeah, yeah, and there's two where this is what's frustrating about Marrou is that's where say a little bit more there.
Well, doesn't he say a little bit more later? It's the Stoics who try to turn every vicious action of Odysseus into some kind of moral lesson.
Oh, okay.
Right? So, yes, he committed adultery with Calypso for 7 years, but eventually he stopped. So he's a good man, and we should be like him.
Yeah, yeah.
Or he lied, but only when he had to.
Right.
Therefore, he's a moral man. Emulate him.
Yes. But yeah, broadly also I found it striking is that, of course, if students have read any Homer today, chances are they've read the Odyssey.
Yes.
They have not read the Iliad.
The Iliad is a harder slog for most people.
Yeah.
It's some 15,000 lines as opposed to the Odyssey, which is quite a bit shorter.
Yeah. And I think, and we've talked about this. We talked about when we went through the Odyssey. The Odyssey reads much more modernly.
Yes.
Right? It's in terms of its jumping of time periods and locations, and it's much more cinematic.
But I prefer the Iliad.
Do you really?
Yes. Second section, the other classics. So, Jeff, what, in addition to Homer, were they teaching and reading in the schools?
Well, there was Homer, of course, wasn't the only epic poet on hand. Hesiod, also there, kind of right there at the beginning.
Right.
This one, this poet Orpheus that Marrou puts in quotes. I had no idea who he's talking about.
Well, the scare quotes are there because most people believe Orpheus was not a real poet.
So he wasn't referring to some other...
No, it's
like
things
tradition.
Supposedly attributed to Orpheus.
To the mythical
the
Orpheus.
Thracian musician.
Yep. And also Corylus and Apollonius of Rhodes, most famous for his Argonautica, was also celebrated. Lyric poets, kind of divided up into the old masters, Alcman, Alcaeus, Sappho, Pindar, but also some of more recent poets, like Callimachus gets a shout out here. And so I think there we're seeing kind of a wrestling with the canon. There's definitely a deep focus on the stuff that's at the beginning that never goes away. But there is room on those last few fingers for Callimachus,
yes,
200
Hellenistic. Say 320 to 240, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
The best quote, of course, is from Callimachus, something like mega biblion, mega kakon.
Yes.
Right? Big book, big problem.
Yes, right. Yeah, strip it down, keep it simple.
I love that one.
Yeah.
Although he himself was a very prolific author.
Yeah.
Who only exists in fragments. Someday we'll devote an entire episode just to Callimachus.
That would be great. Yeah.
What about comedy and tragedy?
Comedy. So he does. So tragedy, of course, was something that every student had to kind of to wade through. Aeschylus and Sophocles. So the big three are there: Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. But I thought it was really striking is that Euripides comes to be recognized as the master of tragedy.
Yes, right? He comes into the great four, as he says.
Yeah, and that's of course that's in some ways I think as we talked earlier, it's a reversal of what kind of is coming out of the 5th century. So Euripides, he wins much fewer prizes than the other two.
Yes.
He seems to be kind of the guy that people love to hate.
Yes, he's pilloried by Aristophanes, right, in the Frogs, as we know.
And speaking of, the Macedonian desire to have kind of a stamp of Greekness, they lure Euripides away at the end of his life.
That's right.
He dies up in Macedon. Yeah.
Yes. Madison, Wisconsin, Macedon. It's all the same.
Exactly.
So right at the end, page 164, we have this lovely little summary which Marrou gives us. And I think this is a kind of a statement that is going to be very useful to our audience.
Yeah.
To sum up, says Marrou, the 4 main pillars of classical culture were Homer, especially the Iliad, Euripides, the tragedian, Menander, new comic poet, and Demosthenes, the great orator. But there was nothing exclusive about these 4. The schools of antiquity were perhaps even more open than our own to second-class writers, and even to the moderns. Now, Jeff, I want to ask what you think about this. If your scale of values, including literary values in a culture, if your scale of values is nicely defined and generally agreed upon, does that make it easier for second-rate authors to enter the lists and be enjoyed?
I mean, my gut reaction would say no.
Well, I'm thinking that if everyone's confident that, yes, these are the 10 classics and they could never be replaced, then there's no perceived threat from reading other things.
Yeah.
In other words, someone comes along and says, hey, would you like to read this particular poet? And if I say, well, do you think he's as good as Ovid? Oh, no.
Yeah.
He's not anywhere near Ovid, but he does this one thing well that you might enjoy. Oh, okay, right?
Yeah.
But there might be kind of a sense of threat if the person believes that this could supplant something I already hold dear in my scale of values.
Gotcha. I guess the way I think about it is, say if I were developing a curricula and say, okay, you've got to have these core texts, and in these other slots, you fill in with other writers or by comparison, second-class writers.
Right.
I think what I would often look for then is, okay, what more contemporary authors have been clearly influenced by these earlier authors. So, you can kind of draw a kind of a line of continuity. And so you're not saying that this one is supplanting the other one or is better than the other, but it's look how the influence still carries on to this particular day. And I think that's always been kind of a benchmark for mine of considering questions of canonization or what's an important work versus an essential work versus a non-essential work is what kind of influence has it had? And
that just seems to prioritize chronology, though, and it goes against you're preferencing the Aeneid over the Iliad, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess in some way. I don't know necessarily it's only about chronology. I think a great work of art has to have been around for a while to be considered such. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the measures of that is what are how many people are responding to it and referencing it and being influenced by it. So I think that chronology is necessary, but I'm not saying that just simply because something is old that it's necessarily better.
Okay. Right. Well, here's a potential Roman analog, and then we'll move on in Marrou. Okay. There used to be the division between Golden Age Latin and Silver Age Latin. Mm-hmm. Right. The Golden Age is Cicero, Virgil, Caesar, etc. Right. Silver Age, Livy kind of falls in there a little bit, but then we really mean Seneca, Juvenal, and then the epic hacks, right? Valerius Flaccus, Silius Italicus, and the third guy that I can't remember. But within our lifetimes, there has been a huge reaction against that, or maybe a correction. It's no longer called golden and silver, and that's thought to be an inappropriate aesthetic judgment. That the Silver Age Latinists are just doing something different, right? But it was Peter Green who said to me, Peter Green of Brackish Tang fame,
yes,
who once said he was surprised he had lived to see the day when people were writing dissertations on hack epicists from the Silver Age.
Is that what he said?
Words very close to that.
Wow, yeah.
But that's him. He can get away with that. So.
Yeah. Hey, well, speaking of hack epicists, it's time for the ads.
All right.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by the great folks at Hackett Publishing. Hackett Publishing offices in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Indianapolis, Indiana. These guys have been with this, our humble little podcast from the very beginning.
Yep.
They took a chance on us, and I think they saw in us, and we see in them kindred spirits.
That's right.
This is a company that is keeping the flame of the classics alive. They're helping people take them in and keep it down.
Right.
With their affordable prices, their high-quality translations. I cannot recommend that our listeners, can't recommend enough you go to hackettpublishing.com and check out their amazing selection. Dave, say a little bit about
Hackett. I can't recommend it more strongly either. They have to go check out the wide catalog. You doing a lot of teaching this semester, right? Things like myth. You teaching some myth again?
I'm teaching some myth, yeah.
Of course, the students, when they see some of the book recommendations, they think, it's going to really cost me. But then you say, no, go to Hackett and see how you can get high-quality translations that are brilliantly put together.
Yes.
Really accurate and, of course, affordable.
Yes.
So instead of cursing the darkness, why don't you light a candle and read a book by it?
Yes.
And if you go to hackett.com, listener, and check out their wide catalog, then when you have all of the books assembled in your little grocery sack and you get to the checkout, you have to enter a coupon code, and that will get you 20% off and
free shipping.
So, Jeff, what is that magical coupon code?
That coupon code is AN, like ad nauseum, followed by the current year, 2025. AN 2025 to get those two wonderful things.
Which is 20% off and
free shipping.
Check it out. This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by Ratio Coffee. Jeff, are we giving away a Ratio 4?
We are giving away a Ratio 4.
Quick, what's the code word?
The code word is Quatuor. So if you're interested in entering that drawing, drop a note to Dave at adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V. And you'll be in the running to win one of these wonderful machines that we're going to announce in March.
That's correct. And if you don't want to wait around and roll the dice, so to speak, if you feel that alia jacta est, the die has already been cast, you can go to ratiocoffee.com right now and check out their wide range of products. And you should go to ratiocoffee.com/ad nauseam. See, we got our own handle now on their website.
Fantastic.
ADNAVSEAM, ratiocoffee.com/ad nauseam, and enter this coupon code. Jeff, what is that one?
ANRATIO, so AN ratio, followed by the current year, 2025.
AN ratio 2025, and that will get them a good discount off their entire order.
Yes.
How are you feeling about your 4 now, Jeff?
Oh, I love the 4.
Yeah?
It makes, I've always loved going into my office anyway because I enjoy what I do, but going in there and finding the ratio 4 ready to go and brew up that perfect cup, and makes it even better.
Nothing complicated about it?
No.
Simple one touch?
One touch. I love the removable water tank.
Yes.
Which you avoid all kind of the messy splashing of trying to fill it up.
Right.
And, it's brilliantly designed.
Yes.
Yep.
So I was traveling recently, which inevitably means, as you know,
no ratio.
Drinking lots of different coffee.
Yep.
Some of it was quite good. I went into a couple of coffee shops there in the Orlando area. Nothing compared to the ratio, I have to say. Man. It's just a supreme cup of coffee.
It is.
And really, really delicious.
Yep.
So listener, do yourself a favor. Go to ratiocoffee.com/ad nauseam. Enter your coupon code ANRatio2025 and score a big savings off your entire order.
Check it out. All right, Dave, as we get back into it, I think our next section that we're going to tackle is Marrou entitled Learned Philology and Education.
Okay.
Yep.
So here near the end of that section, there's a choice quote.
Yes.
He's talking about education, of course, at this time, and he labels them all steadfast conservatives. He says, steadfast conservatives, determined above all things to integrate the whole Greek heritage into their culture, that would be that scale of values, they were less concerned to expurgate Homer for the sake of some abstract principle or other than to explain the accepted text that was already in existence. Instead of looking for verses they could find fault with or interpolations to reject, they made a continuous effort to understand, to justify a particular episode or a particular detail, even if it meant using all the resources of dialectic. So we would call this today, Jeff, special pleading, right?
Yeah.
So you find something in the text that doesn't really seem to fit there, then their job was to say, oh, well, here's how it fits beautifully.
Right.
In a way that you never expected.
Yes.
Says Marrou, this had a profound and lasting effect upon classical teaching. For our own high school pupils are still trained to use all kinds of intellectual gymnastics to justify bits of padding by Cornell or Molière, and to discover dark meanings and hidden beauties in them.
You just described all of academia.
Exactly. Did this ring true to your experience?
It did, right?
And I found myself in this position even sometimes.
Right. I think our joke in here about academics are there to find things that aren't really there.
Right.
He's describing that.
And to write a dissertation about it.
So this is a part of a section where he's distinguishing between kind of these two approaches. You had the Alexandrians, kind of scholias, who are much more interested on a close reading level and kind of looking, okay, what should be in here, what should not. So, a famous example from the Iliad is Book 10, the Dolaneia, which many consider to be
the death of Dolon, right?
The interpolation, and so not Homeric.
Right.
That was one school, and then you had the more kind of conservative Stoic school, almost saying, well, you don't mess with Homer,
right?
And so if you don't get it, the problem is with you.
Yes.
So let me help you by explaining why this thing that seems odd and doesn't fit, how it actually does.
Well, I think that maybe here it's possible I've grown a little bit. Now, it's a good thing you're sitting down. I know you'd be stunned.
Yeah.
But when I first began teaching the classics, I was deeply invested in defending every last thing. You maybe never suffered from this.
No. I know exactly what this is about.
Defending every last element in any kind of literary work, right? So why again, I'll use Iliad Book 9, why is there this extensive barbecue scene where we're taught that, or we're told that, Achilles takes the chines, the backs of the pork, he puts them on spits, he roasts them, he turns them, he feeds them, to the different guests in order, right?
Yeah.
And if a student had asked me, right, so what's the moral vision behind this? When I first began teaching, I would probably spend a lot of time trying to prove that this is profound.
Yes.
But I think I've kind of grown to the point where I would say, it's nice.
Yeah.
Don't you like it? It's there because it's enjoyable, it's interesting, it's human, and that's good enough.
That's good enough. It doesn't be invested with some kind of profundity.
No.
Yes.
And not to say that there couldn't be profundity in it.
Right.
But that I don't have to find it and explain it in order for this activity to be, worth our time.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's just the process of becoming more confident in the material. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that rings true. A kind of a modern corollary is it reminds me of discussions I've had, kind of discussing Bob Dylan lyrics.
Oh,
right.
I didn't see that coming.
So, but and I'm a fan of Bob Dylan, but I'm not an acolyte.
Yeah.
And so I've met people who consider themselves Dylanologists.
Oh, really?
And to kind of suggest that.
I think dilettante is a better term.
But to suggest to some people that this lyric of Dylan's is nonsense,
right?
Is anathema.
It's heresy.
Dylan is like a Homer. It's like he's a prophet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've adapted that to approaching grammar. Just to be very comfortable saying it's like this because that's what the Romans did, right? And I used to say that only when I was really pushed to it because I didn't have an answer. Or the student was being, really obstreperous.
Yeah.
But now that's an answer I go to more readily. Which, well, it's like this because this is just what it is.
This is what they did. Yeah.
Yeah. So you just kind of have to make peace with it.
Right.
And I was driven to that by my sense that sometimes the student doesn't really want the answer. Sometimes the student is expressing indignation.
Yeah. Right.
They're indignant. Why does it have to be like this?
Yes.
And I suppose there's an analog in literature too, right?
Right.
Why is there another scene in the Odyssey of eating?
Yes.
Well, is that a problem? How many meals a day do you have? Right.
Right. Yeah. No, I like that.
All right.
I'm going to use that.
Okay.
That's what the Greeks did.
That's what they did.
What more do you want?
Exactly. Life's too short to complain about that.
Yes. Right. So you think that that Marrou is he's kind of taking the Stoics to task?
Oh, for sure.
Here and elsewhere.
Yes.
So, okay. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. For engaging in special pleading. Right. There's too much of that. Then we go on to the plan and method of the study of the authors. So here we get into something that could be, could be likened to what? To literary criticism. So right near the end of the second open paragraph, Jeff, we have this quote that you could read for us, please. It begins with, according to this.
Right, good. So this is another list. I like lists.
Yes, I do too.
So he writes, according to this, the grammarian's treatment of an author had 4 stages: criticism of the text, reading, exposition, and judgment. And he follows this up with the Greek terms, diorthosis, anagnosis, exegesis, and chrysis.
Right.
All right. And so then he goes, a good chunk of the remaining chapter is going through each of those. Right,
of this portion of the chapter. He's explaining what each of these means. Yep. And he focuses especially on the third one, exegesis, which I guess we would call exegesis. Right. Yep. This is how it's translated. So all this, however, he says at the bottom of 165, was merely introductory. The proper study of the authors only began with the expressive reading. Here again, it was because the books were in manuscript that this kind of exercise, which seems to us so elementary, had to appear at secondary school level. The words were not separated, and the absence of punctuation made reading much more difficult than it is today. The words had to be divided, and this could not always be done without ambiguity. The phrases and sentences had to be found. Questions had to be distinguished from plain statements by the tone of voice. Lines had to be made to scan according to the laws of prosody and meter, and so forth. Yeah.
So Marrou emphasizes the oral nature of this as well, and so he talks a little bit about how this kind of study and practice was not far from or synonymous with musical education.
Exactly.
I think in a way that we don't really have that.
Right. And this is, I would say, a big slap in the face to a Hamiltonian system of interlinears.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We discussed in the last episode, which had nothing to do with an oral component. It was all reading, so far as I know.
Yeah. And he also links this to still a primacy on memorization.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So the next section, explanation of the text, where he gets into exegesis or exegesis. Jeff, could you read some of that for us, please?
Sure. But most of the work was devoted to the explanation of the text, exegesis, to such an extent that it sometimes became almost synonymous with grammatikos. The work was divided, as it is today, into literal explanation and literary explanation. Now, what does he mean by that?
Well, as he goes on to say, right, you first had to understand the actual meaning of the text. So let's take an example. What happens in Iliad Book 1? Well, Achilles is about to draw his sword and slay Agamemnon because Agamemnon has stolen his prize, Briseis.
Yep.
And just when he's about to do it, Athena appears behind him and puts her hand on his sword and grabs him by the hair.
Yeah.
And tells him, you can't do that. That's going too far.
Right.
So that would be the literal meaning.
Yes.
And so says Marrou, quote, the schoolboy's task was to prepare the passage, or as the Greeks put it, his word-for-word list, the onomastikon homeru. He did this as school children make their own vocabularies today. I don't know if they still do that. In 2 columns. On the left were Homer's words. On the right, the modern equivalent. So the word, for example, peleagio, is paidi to Peleos, the son of Peleus. Achilleos is to Achilleos, the son of Achilles. Ulomenein, which is an archaic word, is olethrion, meaning destruction. Muria, a myriad, is given the modern equivalent, at least for the Hellenistic age, pola, very many. Akaios is likened to toishelesi, the Achaeans or the Greeks, and so forth.
Yeah, I found that fascinating because you can see the Hellenistic Greeks grappling with how their own language has changed.
Exactly.
Over hundreds of years by that point, right?
Yes, 1,000, I would say, from the time. Well, I mean, it's probably only 400 or 500 years since the Iliad was committed to writing.
Right.
And it was only in around 510 maybe that the Pisistratids gave it the final form.
Yeah.
But, the words had existed for a very long time.
Right. Yeah.
So, Jeff, I have a question for you. This is the bottom of 168.
Yeah.
And Marrou says, I got to set it up a little bit. He says, interest centered around mythology rather than history.
Yeah.
Around the poets' innumerable legends with their endless array of heroes. Culture and education were being invaded by scholarship on all sides. It was essential, for example, to know the names of all the persons who had been restored to life by the art of Asclepius, to know that Heracles was bald when he came out of the sea monster, which had swallowed him for a moment when he was trying to rescue Hesione from it. So what do you think about this statement here? Culture and education were being invaded by scholarship on all sides. What do you think Marrou means?
Well, I think it raises another question, actually, for me. And I wonder if Marrou is trying to make a distinction between what the ancients thought of myth and history. Does he have a kind of a different view on that? Maybe it's what's being expressed here. So he seems to be, I mean, I read it as a critique here that he's saying that education was overly focused on the fictional, on the fantastical, and not on the historical. Whereas in maybe the mind of an ancient, it would be one and the same thing. When he says culture and education were being invaded by scholarship on all sides, I mean, is he saying that that scholarship is having kind of an undue influence on culture? Well, I think
in the sense of the obsession over minute details, I guess, is the sense that I took from it, because he then cites the philosophers generally, and he uses the skeptic Sextus Empiricus as an example. He says Sextus Empiricus, they were to make a great deal of fun of this mania for learning, which was indeed a bit absurd.
I gotcha. Yeah.
And as the centuries rolled on, the reason why it was a good thing to study the poets became more and more hazy in the Greek consciousness until, from the time of Plutarch to the time of St. Basil, the question had become simply a subject on which to exercise one's skill.
Right. So I think, as we mentioned earlier, the kind of the why are we doing this?
Right.
Is not it's not even being asked anymore. You do it because it's always been done.
That's right.
And it's memorizing detail and knowing obscurities just for the sake of knowing them.
Yes, I did not know, for example, that Heracles was bald when he emerged from the sea monster from which he rescued Hesione.
Yeah, I need to check that footnote there. Where's that coming from?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's see. Ibid. It's Ibid once again. No, it's
that Ibid guy.
he's
Prolific.
He's everywhere.
He's everywhere.
I didn't know that. I
Yeah.
consider myself an educated person, specifically in the classics.
Right, but I don't think you would now say, well, clearly I'm not educated in the classics. I didn't know about the
baldness
that
of
Hercules
Hercules
went bald from going to the sea monster.
Well, apparently by the standards of the time, I would have been.
Right, but I'm with Marrou when he mentions this, like Empiricus saying it's absurd.
Right.
That is true. If that's a mark of being educated, okay, that's
All right.
That's absurd.
All right. Let's go on then in the next section to a part you really wanted to talk about, which is the moral aspect of the study of the poets.
Right. So Marrou begins this section. In theory, the crowning point of all of us learning was judgment, which he puts in quotes. Literary criticism, the finest flower of the grammarian's art. But this did not mean that its primary purpose was aesthetic. It was the rhetor rather than the grammarian who studied the classics in the hope of discovering the secrets of their style so that he might borrow them for himself. The grammarian's object was ultimately moral, and he was thus in the mainstream of the old tradition, with its search for heroic examples of human perfection, to try once again to translate arete in the annals of the past. So
That's fascinating.
For the grammarian, it's you studying these things for cautionary tales and imitative value.
Right.
Okay, yeah. Which I think, like you were saying that, I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, or is that...
You mean as a reason to study them?
A reason to study them, right.
I would have at one time in my life probably very much agreed with it.
Okay.
But not anymore.
Okay.
Now I think a good enough reason is for enjoyment. And not so much for the sake of instruction in excellence.
Yes.
Unless there's a particular thing you want to do.
Right.
Right. If you want to be a great epic poet, then yes, you must study Homer, Hesiod, and Apollonius,
Right.
etc. If you want to be a great public speaker in a specific way, then yes, Demosthenes, Isocrates, Aeschines, and so forth. But I don't desire either of those things.
Yeah.
I'm more am intellectually curious about what they were saying,
Right.
more than a means to an end.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, it strikes me it would largely depend on what you're reading.
Exactly.
So in my myth class, the very first day we read Ovid's Daedalus and Icarus passage, right? And I throw it open to the class. I say, okay, what do you think this means?
Yes.
Or I've
done that too.
Or say, like, why do you think the Romans would have told and circulated this story? And I think very often the students will come back and with kind of deeply moral things.
Yeah, and I think Ovid is conveying a moral there. In fact,
listen to your parents,
at least in part,
right?
Don't innovate on nature.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
He's quite clear about that.
Right. And so that whole kind of notion of hubris meets nemesis,
right?
And so I think that
death is better than bondage.
Yes,
right. Daedalus says, "Yeah, we'll probably die."
Yeah,
and so he weeps, right, as he makes the wings, but he thinks it's better for my son and I to die trying to get free, than to stay imprisoned forever.
Exactly, right.
So, I don't know.
So I think there are timeless human longings in that, but to apply that with a broad brush, I think that's where you can run into trouble. Yeah.
So Bowdlerization in the next paragraph. We got to start watching the clock a little bit here. But Marrou says, as time went on, the ancients seemed to have become less and less aware of the sublimity that was supposed to lie behind all this learning of Homer. The feeling for pure poetry was stifled by an excess of erudition. Hellenistic teachers tried to give a rational form to the lessons and wisdom which they expected their pupils to learn. This kind of well-meant Bowdlerization is usually fatal. Any tampering with great poetry for scholastic purposes inevitably results in mediocrity. From the poets, especially Homer, Hellenistic teachers tried to extract a fully articulated moral code. The prime movers in this endeavor were the Stoics. In their hands, Homer became the, quote, wisest of poets, a romantic wise man, intentionally concealing under the veil of myth a complete and detailed body of doctrine, the meaning of which could be discovered by investigating his allegories.
Right. Yeah. So you can kind of make anything mean everything, and vice versa. Right.
Where it's an interesting intellectual exercise. Yeah. But I would say that the individual is adding a great deal to the text that isn't there.
Right. Right. So we can maybe lay at the feet of the Stoics a bit of this notion that Homer is untouchable.
Right.
Right. I mean, I suppose Homer himself invites that by in the opening line when he's kind of this is not me speaking, but the God speaking through me. Right. So I mean, Homer even the poetry setup is that he's a voice from from beyond,
right?
Which makes him maybe more difficult to critique. But yeah, I mean, I see that in the Stoics' approach is much more. If it sounds odd, then we've got to explain the oddity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So right at the bottom of 169, we have a great example from Plutarch. So Plutarch has this treatise which Marrou calls Naive, and the title of which is On the Way in Which Young Men Should Read the Poets. Says Marrou, if Homer shows us the lewd adulterer Paris forgetting all about the fighting and going to bed with Helen in the middle of the day, so this, of course, is book 3, I believe, of the Iliad.
Yep.
Says Marrou, this is obviously so that he can pour scorn on such goings-on. You're supposed to laugh here, Jeff, because Plutarch's being naive.
Yeah, okay.
That's not the reason that Homer's telling the story.
Right.
I think he's also not holding up Paris as a model of, morality that one should emulate.
Of course not. Right.
But neither is the opposite true. It's more along the lines of he's telling a story of something that he either believes happened or could have happened.
Right.
And this is how people behave.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
All right, Jeff, so we're coming to the end of the chapter here, and we're going to deal with one little final bit before we wrap up, and that is the section Practical Exercises in Composition.
Yes.
So I think it's page 173. You were going to share a little bit of this with us.
Sure. So Marrou gives an example of something found on a papyrus in Egypt. Says, here's an example, a late 1/4 or 5th century, found on a papyrus in the Fayum. A son who had murdered his father was afraid of being caught by the law, and so he fled to the desert. The child has, in this case, remembered a verse from the original and put it down word for word. And going over the mountain, he was chased by a lion. And with the lion chasing him, he climbed up a tree. And seeing a dragon leap onto the tree that could climb up it, and fleeing from the dragon, he fell down. Wicked people cannot escape from God. God will bring the wicked to judgment. Another line written down from memory. It was a saying attributed to Menander.
Yeah. So that's the young boys' exercise in practical composition.
Yes.
Right? Practical exercise in composition.
With a deep moral moral attached to it, right?
Yeah, a pretty heavy-handed one in some ways. I'm not saying it's false. I think God will bring the wicked to judgment, but you can't necessarily know that from the story, I guess. And,
right.
It does seem a little heavy-handed for a child's composition exercise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I think that it reminds me of things like the original Grimm's fairy tales.
Oh yeah,
are brutal.
Yeah, they are.
Like our children's stories today are much more kid loves.
Like what's a Lemony Snicket?
Yeah, that's old school now, right?
Oh, that's old school.
Well, I think that Lemony Snicket he's kind of. Lemony Snicket would read this and say, "Oh yeah, that's how it's done."
Diary of a Wimpy Kid, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. A little bit more hard edged. Yeah.
Well, Jeff, I think that wraps up Marrou. Did it turn out to be as much of a slog as you feared?
No, it last time we did it, a similar kind of result. It's I think as he kind of warms up, I warm up too.
There's charm, but we have to get out of here. And why is it that we have to get out of here?
Well, the one that's how did people find the new bunker? They always find the new bunker.
I don't know, but they our enemies are resourceful.
Right, but
they know how to find us.
I just got a text, and the people banging on the door. It's the Australian Specialty Coffee Association.
The ASCA?
Yes. What's their problem with
Asking
us?
no questions. I think that they are upset about all the marsupod jokes.
Oh, I see.
Right? The Keurig, right? Where you put the little marsupod in there and there's a little bit of...
Little Joey in every cup?
In every cup,
So they're offended by this.
They are. What is the ASCA?
Well, it's a volunteer... led not-for-profit organization that has the mission to develop and empower coffee professionals across Australia.
I say it's about time that coffee professionals across Australia got empowered.
They've been so marginalized.
It's in fact past time. So maybe we should yield the vomitorium to them so they can make use of it to
yes. I'm going to pause
their
here.
Marsu podcast.
Is this an actual group? Or
yes. Yeah, they
I thought you had written this up.
No, they release a Marsu podcast every week. Speaking about strange facts regarding kangaroos.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Share some of these with us, Jeff.
Yes, they can't walk backwards.
Really?
Did not know that.
Huh.
Kangaroos can't walk or hop backwards because of their long feet and large tail. Okay.
Here's a shocking one.
Yeah.
Female kangaroos can pause their pregnancies.
How can they do that? They just hit a button and...
I don't know.
Let's wait. I'm going to wait on this.
Yeah.
Man,
how can they do that?
My goodness, right. And I like this. Kangaroos live in family groups called mobs.
So there's the
it's
callback.
A mob of kangaroos.
It's a mob of kangaroos.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a parliament of owls.
Yes.
It's a warren of rabbits.
Yes. It's a pod of whales.
Yes. It's a murder of crows.
That's my favorite. Yep. Exactly.
And it's a something of podcasters.
Exactly.
I don't
regrettable.
know.
Yes.
Regrettable of podcasters.
But let's let them in.
Okay.
Let's just try to make peace.
We'll yield.
But before we go, Dave, tell us if our listeners want to learn Greek, they want to learn Latin.
Yes.
You have a way that they can do that.
I do, and it won't be like the things described in this chapter. Now, some things will overlap. I can teach you how to read Homer, Demosthenes, Lysias, and company. I can also teach you how to read Cicero, Virgil, etc. So you can read the Aeneid along with Jeff when you are stranded on that desert island somewhere. Go to latinperdiem.com. We are actually, before long, we are going to retire the Moss Method website, but not the Moss Method itself. Everything is going to be hosted on latinperdiem.com. As you said last time, one-stop shopping.
Fantastic.
The courses are being fabulously redesigned, and it's going to be an even better value. So
Very cool.
Please go there to latinperdiem.com and check out what we have to offer. In addition, on the YouTube channel, almost 2,200 different free lessons to check out.
Man.
And the last thing is the Calvin's Latin Bible Android app. So if you have Google Play, if you have an Android device, go to Google Play and enter in the search bar Calvin's Latin Bible, and there's a wonderful gift waiting for you there.
Fantastic.
Now,
Excellent.
whom do we need to thank?
As always, Mishka, our wonderful engineer, puts this together, turns it around so quickly, and makes us always sound better than we are. If we find things that aren't in the text, she finds a way
That's right.
to make us chuckleheads sound better than we actually
Absolutely.
are. Right.
Thank you so much, Mishka. And young Mishka has a birthday coming up in February.
Oh,
We'll have
fantastic.
to find some way to mark that.
Yes. And then the great music that you hear throughout, the bumper music.
The intro, the outro, the screaming guitar.
Yep, Scott Van Zen and Ken Tamplin. So thankful to these guys for their generosity, allowing us to use their music.
Yes, if you want to get a free ratio 4, send me an email, dave@adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V with the secret code word. I'm not going to repeat it here. You'll have to go back and listen.
Yep.
And Jeff, what if they want to get in touch with you?
You can write to me, jeff@adnauseam.com. Don't forget that V. If you've got an idea for a show, you've got a question, you've got a correction. It's been a bit since we've heard from our nemesis, who's always footnoting us.
The guy down under.
Yeah,
That's right.
Right.
Tom, I think was his name.
He's a member of the ASCA.
Yeah,
I
he
think.
probably is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm gonna boldly say.
Okay.
Next week we're gonna do a pair of Ovidian vignettes. What do you think?
That. Let's go right back to Ovid.
Yeah. You pick one. I'll pick one.
Okay.
and we'll take
do
it apart.
All right.
And Dave, you have our gustatory parting shot.
I do, and this time it comes from a man, Cesar Chavez.
Yes.
I believe was
Labor leader?
labor organizer,
Yep.
Californian.
Yep.
I really like this quote. He says, "If you really want to make a friend, go to someone's house and eat with them. The people who give you their food give you their heart."
I like it.
I like it, but have you ever tried following this kind of advice?
Just showing up at someone's house and
just
eating their
knock
food.
on the door. I'm here. Let's
No,
be friends.
I haven't tried that yet. Exactly.
We should give it a go.
Yes, we should.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.